Hey, look, I remembered to turn the mic back on this week. I don't know how much of the sermon we missed last week because I just started going. But you can always blame the sound guys, even when it's completely your fault. Hey, welcome. We're in a series on Hebrews still, and so we're going through the book. It was kind of funny because I was talking to, you guys know Justine. Remember, she's spoken here a couple times, and we were talking about something the other day about commentaries, and I'm like, yeah, I'm like on week 26, and she's like, oh, that's a lot. I'm like, oh, I think it's going to be about 32. And it's funny because my series, I think the older I get, the series get longer because I find kind of more things and deeper things, and so like the next time we do Philippians, it might be a year. I don't know. It's lots of good stuff in there, and I think again, why we teach through the books of the Bible is because we feel like the Bible is important. And a lot of times you sign up for faith, you sign up for Christianity. I don't know about you, I became a believer before I kind of knew the whole deal. And I was like, and people were like, oh, the Bible. I'm like, okay, I'll be about the Bible. And I was actually reading it at the time anyway, but there's a lot in there. And it's kind of like the software agreement. You click yes to it, but you don't know what's in it. And so sometimes we hit some sections that are a little tougher to teach and some awkward things. And so this week is going to be a little similar to some of the stuff we talked about last week. But anyway, so, a lot of times people build their lives on things that are not stable, right? I was mowing recently, and I'll be honest, I'm sitting there mowing, and most of I live by a lake, and the bank is kind of steep, especially since the tornado kind of changed the contour of everything, and I'm still trying to do landscaping, and it's tough because it kind of overgrew, and then my mower broke, and so I spent some time learning how to fix things on mowers. I'm not really mechanical on small engines, and so I managed to fix the mower. I got it going again this week, but it'd been like a couple weeks, and I'd been away before that, and we've had plenty of rain, apparently, and so now my grass is like ridiculously tall. Anyway, so I'm trying to mow down by the lake, which I sort of neglect at times, to be honest, because I kind of get away with mowing the stuff other people see, but every once in a while you got to do it. And so I'm mowing. Long story short, I fell into the lake. And it was ridiculously funny because I couldn't be mad at anyone else, right? Because sometimes you do something and you get mad because, oh, someone left this in the middle of the garage, or oh, someone left this in the middle, who left this toy out and I tripped, why did I step on Legos, all those things. But, literally, it was nobody's fault but mine. And what happened was I was mowing and I was cutting, and I thought what was behind me was solid, because there was grass and stuff, and it got so that I had to walk out on a log and weed whack yesterday. That's how overgrown it was. And so I'm mowing, and I step, and what I thought was solid was not. There was solid ground, but it was like 3 feet down. And so I fell into the lake. It was awesome. It was funny. And I managed to get up on the pier, and I texted my wife, because that's what you do now. I was like, hey, I just fell in the lake. And I'm just laughing. I texted her so she could come out and make fun of me, because that's what you should do when you're married, right? Because it was like, it was so hilarious to me. I was like frustrated. I was wet, but it was funny. Because, it was just funny. She came out to check on me because she's a better person than I am, to make sure I'm okay. She's like, well, the mower stopped. Well, that was when it was in the lake. But mower still works. I fell in the lake. I kept the mower anyway. I laughed, but here's the thing. Sometimes we're confident and sure of things, right? But they don't hold up. I was confident. I didn't purposely step in the lake or jump in the lake. I did that plenty of times growing up. But, this time I looked back, I saw grass, I thought I was good, I stepped back, and I was surprised, and suddenly I'm going backwards into a lake. And that's, sometimes we're confident and sure of things, but they don't hold up, they don't last. And so we're in a kind of an interesting part of Hebrews, and we're going to talk about that. Hebrews chapter 12, starting verse 25, says this: "Be careful you do not refuse to listen to the one who is speaking. For if the people of Israel did not escape when they refused to listen to Moses, the earthly messenger, we will certainly not escape if we reject the one who speaks to us from heaven. When God spoke from Mount Sinai, his voice shook the earth. And now he makes another promise. Once again, I will shake not only the earth, but the heavens also. This means that all of creation will be shaken and removed, so that only unshakable things will remain." And one of the tough things I think about the book of Hebrews, if you're not familiar with the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, we call it, I don't like Old Testament because it sounds like it's not relevant, or it's like, I mean, it is old, like kind of like someone hit a birthday this week, and they were talking about it's like the 16th celebration of their whatever birthday, because you get older, you don't want to be called old all the time. I'm a little older now, so but I think old sort of makes it sound like it's not relevant. But I like to call it the Hebrew Bible, and because I like Hebrew stuff anyway. But a lot of the imagery and things are difficult if you kind of haven't read that. And I had a different experience of faith than many. I started reading the book in Genesis because I just kind of felt convicted this was important. I didn't really know God, but I kind of felt this is like how I'm going to figure him out. And I started reading Genesis, and I read through Genesis to Revelation in one night. No, I'm kidding. No, it took a long time. And I was studying like all kinds of things, like how to slaughter sheep and different things. I remember at points someone's carrying the ark, and I'm like, no, that's the wrong way you carry an ark. Not the boat ark, but another kind of ark. And there's all these kind of details. But I think if you don't kind of know that history, this is kind of a weird mystery passage. You're like, what the heck are they talking about? And so the author uses the Old Testament Hebrew Bible references, and they can be fun to unpack it all and explore the imagery. You can also kind of get lost in the forest for all the trees, and you can go off on tangents here. And so I want to share something, and really we shared this last week too. These two passages kind of join together a little bit, but it's about the story here. There's a lot of references to Mount Sinai. And so Mount Sinai is after the Israelites had been in Egypt. They were 400 years in slavery. There's all kinds of plagues. You should see Prince of Egypt. Anyone ever see that cartoon? Like, that's awesome. And there's songs. It's cool. And so, that movie, there you go. You catch up on the whole Old Testament. but they come out of slavery. They come out of Egypt, and they're there on Mount Sinai, and it kind of talks about God was holy, and it showed. Even Moses is scared, and it's sort of this kind of all kinds of stuff going on. And I think that the image you need of this is like Mount Doom in Mordor. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, or a volcano. There was all kinds of stuff, and Sinai was sort of this shock and awe and all this stuff going on, and it really kind of showed this visual demonstration of God's awesomeness and power. And the bottom line is God was unapproachable to us through sin. We can only approach because he approaches us. And so there's this kind of, all this stuff happening. So that's sort of the backdrop and the picture of that we're here. It says, do not refuse to listen to the one who's speaking. There's a joke I like. It's the husband says, my joke is, my wife is so weird. She starts every argument with, are you even listening to me? Take a few seconds. Some of you are a little slower on getting that one. I'm seeing. Because sometimes we don't listen. I think dudes especially, like I have to do, not have to, I get to do. I do premarital stuff for couples, and there's like these exercises you take and everything. And some of you have been through it, and it's like there's this one communication exercise, and people usually think, oh, we absolutely communicate all the time. And then most of the time we go through the communication exercise, and they're like, oh, wow, we really could work on a few things, right? Because not to say that we don't communicate, but it's sometimes hard, and sometimes husbands and wives struggle to communicate, in relationships, and sometimes really it's hard to listen in life. With 2020 and the COVID, the pandemic and everything, everyone starts kind of working at home more, and it's interesting. I bet headphone sales went up, and everyone wears earbuds everywhere they go anyway now. Like, you talk to somebody and you realize they totally can't hear you. Anyone ever do that? I'm talking to this dude in the gym the other day, totally could not hear me, and I felt so stupid because I was having a conversation, I thought, and he was just kind of standing there, and then he takes the thing out, and I go, never mind, I can't repeat all that. But I'm at home sometimes, and if I have my headphones on, it's for two things. One, to kind of block out because I don't want to hear them because I'm trying to work, right? And the second thing is, I'm trying not to disturb them by everything that's going on. It's to hear. But, we've had whole conversations until my wife realized I had the earbuds in. And I've got the cheap little ones, and they kind of stick in there. And, that she doesn't hear. Like, she doesn't see my earbuds, or she can be having a conversation with me, but I'm not a part of it. And so it's easy to kind of ignore, a voice. And I think especially, this sermon, I swear, is not all about how old I am. But, there's certain things that have changed as you get a little bit older. And my kids make fun of us because, like, if you don't look directly at me sometimes now, I have trouble hearing what you're saying. And COVID was really, really bad on those of us who are, I'm not deaf, but, I am Jeff. No, I am a little bit older. And it's like, with a mask on, I couldn't hear what anybody was saying. It was like, it was awkward and weird at times. You're just like, uh-huh. And sometimes you get tired of asking, you just kind of go, uh-huh. Anyone ever do that when they But so I need line of sight, And so my wife and I sometimes, we have to stop what we're doing to talk to each other because I have to look at her so she can hear me. Or she has to look at me so I can hear her. And so, it's hard to hear sometimes. As I've told you, most of my life, I like sports and stuff. I don't like to watch sports, which is weird. I do occasionally like to watch football on a Sunday afternoon, but I'm more likely to turn on like the Sunday afternoon movie or something. My wife is more likely to turn on football, but I always loved playing football and wrestling and everything. I always loved to do sports. And, it was a funny thing because in the middle of a football game, there could be thousands of people screaming, right? But you know who I could hear? My coach over on the sideline. I could focus in and I could hear his voice. It was usually yelling at me because I wasn't doing something right, but I could hear it. Like wrestling. I loved wrestling, and sometimes in a wrestling match, you get a tournament or something, there's all kinds of people screaming at you, because wrestling's one of those sports, like everybody thinks they know what you need to do too, and they're yelling all kinds of ridiculous moves, and then I've been around the sport long enough, the rules have changed, and so people are yelling stuff that you're no longer even allowed to do. Put them in a suplex. No, we don't do that. That's wrestling. This is wrestling. And, there's all these kinds of things. This thing, though, I could ignore all those voices and listen to my coach. Because that voice was important. Because if I didn't listen to that voice, what happened? Usually bad things. Now, every once in a while, you do something that you knew was right, that the coach was telling you not to do, and it worked out, and he let it pass that time. But for the most part, if you don't listen to the voice, there's consequences. You're not playing anymore, right? You're going to ride the pine. And so, we have to learn to listen. Jesus says, John 10:10, or John 10:27, my sheep listen to my voice, I know them, and they follow me. And at some point in life, we have to kind of figure out what voices we're going to, listen to. Now, if there's ones in your heads, that's another conversation we need to have. But I'm not talking about those voices, but often we listen to the culture around us, right? We're often driven by the time period we live in and the things that are happening around. We don't realize it because, it's funny. Someone sent me, Carolina, so she's not here, I'll point to her. Anyway, she sent me a video last night. I was like, how in the heck did you ever find this? I used to run a music venue, some of you know, and it was like, this was like 2003. She stumbled on this video, and I'm like looking at myself, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I guess that's the way I looked. I still have the shirt, which is great. Actually, it's funny, the shirt was the same one that I wore when I brought Josh home as a baby in the hospital. And a year ago, I did that picture when he turned 19, and I tried to hold him, and I wore the same shirt. I had to lay him on a couch because he was so big. But, because they do get big, as you're finding out. And so, it was funny watching this video because, I see people, and I kind of recognize them, but some of them I know now. Sarah was in the video, helped us out through face painting. And I was like, oh my gosh, she kind of looks the same. But other people, it's like you're kind of looking, you're like, oh my gosh. And some of you are kind of going, was I in that video? I'll post it sometime. We'll find it. But it was funny because, you look, all the kids are kind of dressed a certain way. And it's funny because, generations of kids all sort of, they want to be different. They dress the same way to be different, right? Because there's a culture, and people kind of dress certain ways, and they act certain way. And the cooler you look now in your pictures, the dumber you're going to look later for generations, because it's like the equivalent of wearing like a powder blue tux with ruffles or something. And it's funny because every generation, it's like the generation loved the skinny jeans, and they got on my generation for not wearing skinny jeans. I'm like, I can't wear skinny jeans. They don't make skinny jeans this big, you know what I mean? And now the next generation's wearing baggy pants, and not just one of them, like all of them. Like there's just change, and so a lot of times there's all these things about culture that we don't realize drive us. And I am not anti-movie TV guy, right? Like I like movies, I like TV, I like to read too, but it's like I don't. Those things aren't bad. Music is not bad, but we do have to sometimes look at how it shapes us. Because it does, it shapes us. It shapes how we think, how we feel, and a lot of things. And if we're not careful, we quickly, the things we consume, we become like them. I've told the story before in a lot of ways. Like, it was funny growing up here. Then we moved to Pittsburgh. Then we moved out to Los Angeles. And I thought people in LA were crazy. Anyone think people in LA are crazy? It was like they're always in a hurry, all kinds of things. They were nuts. And then I moved to Maine, and you know what I realized at some point? I'd become like an LA person, because I was living up in closer to Lewiston, Auburn. I was living up in Maine, and I developed all these habits and ways of living that I thought were crazy when I lived in LA, but I'd become like them. I'd become an LAian. I don't know what they're called anymore. I don't know. We just lived there for 3 years. And so, there's, we become like the culture around us. It's natural. And not everything about culture is bad, but we have to be careful in that that's not the voice we listen to the most. Do we listen to ourselves? I think we're a very self-centered culture in America. We talk about, ourselves and everything. And the Bible says a lot about problems in our hearts. Jeremiah 17:9, deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. That's how the human heart's described. Because, there's times where, if we're honest, I mean, not any of you, but people, that sometimes we crave and desire things that are not good, right? Like, ever been cut off and wish the person would get in a car accident? Like, that's maybe a little extreme, right? But it's in there sometimes. David asked the Lord, we did, Psalms not too long ago, create in me a clean heart. Because we tend to retain some things and get some things in there that kind of need to be, gotten out of us. And sometimes the advice, follow your heart. Now, if you're really worshiping the Lord and loving on him and just follow your heart, sometimes God speaks to your heart. So I do believe that. But often, follow my heart will lead me into places I don't want to be, because sometimes there's some stuff there. And so, the heart is a lot like mulch beds. Outside we have these mulch beds. And, if anyone ever wants to help me shovel mulch, great, because I hate shoveling mulch. But it's like, I remember a couple years ago, we got together and we kind of, we did a big work day, and we pulled back all the beds because they were really bad. We put fabric in, we cut plants out, and I have no idea what I'm doing when I'm gardening with plants. Anyone else? You're just I don't know, are these the ones you cut off or these the ones you leave in? And people were asking us, we're like, we don't know. Just, I don't know. And so we just cut some stuff off, we put some beds in, and then for the most part, it looked good. But then all of a sudden there was these big lumps and weird things happening, and we ended up slitting the fabric, and out came good plants that we didn't realize we'd cut off some good stuff. And there's some bad ones too that we had to kill and pull out better. But what was there wasn't killed, so it came through. And I tell the story all the time about when we were downtown. I loved being downtown; it was fun. But one of the things that the city did a project there, and they were so proud of themselves because they did it under budget, and they were tooting that as, oh, we did it under budget. And I'm like, but you know what they didn't do? When they did the landscaping and they did all these beautiful, pretty rock beds, they skipped fabric. So it was a real wet spring. And so then quickly, the beautiful rock beds were just huge bushy weeds and everything. And I laughed because I was like, if you'd spent just a few more dollars of that budget, you wouldn't have to pay all the maintenance costs you do now. Because if you don't take care of those things, if we don't weed out the things that don't belong there, bad things happen. When we have to prevent things from growing back. And so we have to be careful sometimes in our hearts because we can clean it before God, but sometimes, it still leads us astray. Do we listen to, God who changes our hearts? Proverbs 4:23 says, guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. And we did Proverbs this summer. We did that one. And so, Proverbs, guard your heart. Because, God will direct us through that. And ultimately, we have this book. And it's funny, I'm reading from an iPad. I'm telling you, we have this book. I like to read from a physical Bible, but this music stand, people are like, there's all these debates online. What do you preach out of? I'm like, music stand. Because people ask me why I don't preach from behind that. It's like driving a spaceship or something. It's this huge, massive thing. And I feel like I'm looking down on all of you like, you sinners. Anyway. So maybe I will get up there when I'm feeling a little self-righteous. But hopefully now that we bought the building, we can maybe build some things, change some things. But it's a little cheesy, but the Bible itself, not that the Bible's cheesy, but the backronym, if you will, is basic instructions before leaving Earth. Backronym is when you make an acronym out of a word you already have. So in case you were wondering, it's perhaps a little cheesy, but it's helpful. Because what the Bible does, and the reason we treat it like the software agreement and click yes, but we try to explain it, is because the Bible reveals God's heart and the way things should be. And we have this constant tendency to drift. We often talk about it being this slow fade, and I can never remember who. I always mention that song, and I don't know who it is, and I look back at my wife, and she knows who it is, and I don't. There's a song that is slow fade, because we can tend to drift away slowly. It's like, you ever been at the beach? And you go out from, I love the beach. It's Josh is like living in the Midwest now. And the other day they're like, you dress like you're going to the beach. He's like, everyone in the East Coast dress this way. Because we do go to the beach. You can't. I love Missouri, but there's no ocean there. Anyway, so, you go out, I love going to the beach. And you go out to the beach. And what happens though if you go right out and you start playing in the water? It happened to me all the time as a kid. I'd end up like 2 lifeguard stands down. And then you're like crying because you can't find your mom. Hopefully not now, but when I was smaller. And then, in those days, people didn't really watch their kids like we do now. Like, it was just like you just end up like in Rehoboth when you started at Dewey, and they'd find you later. See, Dad's not here today. I can tell those stories. He always says he comes because he can make sure the stories he tells to see what I got away with as a kid. But it's these instructions that help us not drift. And that's why we teach from the Bible. Verse 27 says, all creation will be shaken and removed so that only unshakable things will remain. Now, and this is again where it would be helpful if you knew the entire Hebrew Bible. But most of you read this, though, if you read the Bible, you know Haggai, right? Some of you are like, no. We actually did a series on, like, they call them the minor prophets, and not that they went mining things, but they were like the smaller books. And so Haggai, it's kind of to fast forward. This is a reference to that. There's a major fast forward through Israel's history. They wanted a king, they get one. King causes problem. They split into 2 kingdoms. They're conquered. They go into exile. Small group returns. They build a temple, but it's kind of like. They built this new temple, but they're kind of like, it's not as good as the old one. Most of you know I love Mustangs. Not the horses, they're cool too. But, I have an old 66 Mustang that's been in the family since 66, and it's very rusty and doesn't always work, and I've got all kinds of problems, and often doesn't start, and I have to get up there and like tweak some things, but I love the car, right? Something you may not know, I used to have a 78 Mustang. Now, some of you went, oh, good. But those of you who know what a 78 Mustang looks like went, they called it the Mustang II. It was not a very good car. It was like, now I read this, it was like, what if you took a Mustang and a Ford Pinto and combined them? If you love muscle cars and old cars and classic cars, you don't like the Mustang II for the most part. Now, you could drop a huge engine in it and have some fun with it, but, one I loved and kept, The other we traded in at some point for something, unremarkable as well. Because the one was just a mode of transportation, the other was a beautiful work of American muscle car art. Although one, I read this article about that because I was trying to remember the years they produced it, and the guy was arguing we should love the Mustang too. It was terrible, but it kept the Mustang alive, so we can have modern Mustangs. I don't know. It seems anyway. So kind of, the original was good, the remake not so good, and that's kind of what happened with the temple. Is those who were there after the exile who remember the old temple were kind of like, like it's not very good temple. This thing is kind of not so much. And so ultimately God says, hey, I'm gonna shake it up, and this is what He says in Haggai. For this is what the Lord of Heaven's army says: in just a little while, I will again shake the heavens and the earth, the oceans and the dry land. And what it's pointing to is that ultimately there is this judgment time. And it's kind of like a sports team. A new coach comes in, what do? They shake things up, right? Because the team's been going in the wrong direction. They start trading people, all kinds of things. And ultimately with a coach, you're like, sometimes they do things that seem crazy, but then the team starts winning and you're like, oh, maybe they did know what they were doing. And so this is like, players going to play, haters going to hate. You just got to shake it off. A little terrible. Anyway. Silly way to make my point, but there's a point to it, is that deep truth, God's going to shake it off. He's going to shake things up. Now, here's the thing. That, you might ignore that truth. That might terrify you. The thought of like God's going to come and kind of shake things up, because it depends on where you build your life. If you build your life and your foundation on things that don't hold, you step into the lake while you're trying to mow grass. Earthquakes are interesting. We don't have a lot of them in Delaware, but I remember when we moved to California, I remember my first earthquake, because we were sitting there in the morning and I was like, there were some larger people upstairs, and they were kind of noisy sometimes. I'm like, man, they're really being noisy today. What are they doing up there? And it was like, and I realized, no, the building is going left to right, not up and down. And I was like, oh, that's my first earthquake. That's kind of cool. It's like being rocked back to sleep. Who needs to get up today? And then they're also thinking, is this building about to collapse? Like what are the earthquake protocols? We didn't go over that. As a kid, we just hid under the desks with our heads like this, hoping the protective gum would protect us from nuclear war. We didn't do a lot of, other kinds of drills. Anyway, and then I remember years later, and we went through a couple all together, and it's kind of an interesting thing. And then, I remember a couple years ago, I can't remember when it was. I was up on Kirkwood Highway. I was in a meeting with somebody, and you guys remember this? All of a sudden, everything started shifting side to side, and I was like, everyone in Starbucks got weirdly quiet. And I remember being the first one to speak, because it seemed like a long, long time, and I can't have a long silence without saying something. And finally, I was just like, I know this is crazy, but that felt like an earthquake. And everyone's kind of like, everyone starts jumping on things like, Twitter or Facebook or whatever we were on in those days, I can't remember, and trying to figure out, maybe it was MySpace, Zanga, anyway, and trying to figure out, hey, and it was an earthquake, right? And so maybe you've been in one. The crazy thing is about earthquakes, and when you go to different places where there's a really big one, is the buildings that survive, usually they're built different, right? Now, sometimes we don't get the engineering right, and the earthquake-proof buildings don't last. But you kind of have to build different to survive earthquakes, and that's the way life is. Ultimately, there would be this shaking up, this shaking down, this shaking out, and how and where you build your life will determine the outcome of that shaking on you. Verse 28 says, since we are receiving a kingdom that is unshakable, let us be thankful and please God by worshiping Him with holy fear and awe, for our God is a devouring fire. It's unshakable. Our hope is not in this world, and we talk about that. Now, I love this world. I enjoy being in this world. This is not like a suicidal thought, but I'm looking forward to the next. And I live this way, in this world, a certain way, knowing that, the next part's even better. Now, a lot of us on earth, we will live, it's crazy how hard people will work for retirement. You know what I mean? Like, people just like work because they can't wait to retire, and then you're too old and tired to do anything. But and that's another story. And Lewis can help you plan. I'm not saying like retirement is a bad thing. It's a good thing. You know, if you can enjoy retirement years, awesome. But we put all our hope in this world, and some of us don't give thought to the next. And this is not our home. This is just, Peter calls us strangers and aliens. Some of you are strangers than others. No, but, in the fact that we don't really fit entirely here because our hope is in another world. We're just passing through. I was thinking about Jenga. You guys like Jenga? Like, I like it. I love the game. And then, like, we have the bigger set here. And has anyone ever played with me? What's the number one rule with Jenga for Jeff? I'm a jerk. I will always take the bottom piece so that you're stuck on like one little one on the bottom. Do you hate people like me who do that? I do it right at the beginning, and I've knocked the whole thing down at the beginning too, doing this. But I love to do it because it makes the whole thing unstable and makes everything awkward. And I'm a jerk. Now, I'm a Jenga jerk. But I usually win. I'm just saying. I pull the bottom ones because it's funnier. But I wouldn't pull it if my life depended on that outcome, right? If that was on the edge of a cliff and we put my kids on top of it, I wouldn't like pull out the bottom one, right? I'd be as careful as I can. Because, when the risk is real, it changes the game. And when you understand that what you're building on in this life matters, you'll build differently. You'll be concerned. A familiar verse, if you're around here much, because I love this verse, and not just because I ran a youth ministry. It was called Solid Rock at one time, so I'd always use this verse. That's back when I ran the music venue and everything. Different times. It was funny to see some of the people, man, they look so young, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's Ron when he was young. Sorry, Ron, if you're listening. He's younger than me, but we're a little older, a little longer in the tooth, a little grayer. I had to trim down the beard because it was getting too gray. Anyway, Matthew 7, starting verse 24, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it, this is Jesus speaking, is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes and torrents and flood waters rise and the winds beat against that house, it won't collapse because it is built on bedrock. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. When the rains and the floods come and the winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. And so if you're a believer and a follower of Jesus, you need to hear the words of Jesus, put faith in who Jesus is, but then we follow the words. Now, specifically, I love reading the Sermon on the Mount. That's where this comes from, that first part of Matthew there. And because it's great synopsis of what Jesus teaches. And a lot of it's challenging. A lot of people would say, oh, I'm a believer, I'm a follower of Jesus. But when you look at the way they live and the way the Sermon on the Mount would challenge you to live, man, it just seems a little different. They must be reading a different New Testament. Now, we all have inconsistencies in the way we live and what we believe. So I'm not saying that. But we should be striving to, live differently because of our faith in Christ. And so, we should hear the words of Jesus and try to live those out. Ultimately, it's, will we do what he says? Will we build our lives on something that's unshakable or something that's shakeable? Are we going to step into the lake while we're mowing the lawn? Or are we going to stay on the ground? Foundations are important. Now, it's funny because the bigger you build something, the kind of longer the foundation takes. You ever seen a large building being built in the city or something? And it's like, you're just like, that is a hole in the ground for a really long time. And there's all kinds of things they have to do. And I told you, when we had a carport that we turned into a garage, and it was like, man, I was reliving the memories the other day because the guy next to me, he's building, kind of doing the same thing. And I was like, yeah, I hit a foundation that was too shallow and had to sit there in that hole with a little jackhammer. And I'm old, and that jackhammer shakes your whole body. And I was, I was done. But, all that work paid off because once I had a good foundation, when the tornado came through our place, and you've occasionally heard me tell tornado stories because, when you only get your house destroyed once as a tornado, it's great as a pastor because you got years of stories just from that. No, I'm kidding. It's, it was a tough time. I love you guys. You guys came and helped. Appreciate it. Made food. Appreciate that. Anyway, but, tornado came through. because of the foundation we built, I still had my carport that was kind of half into a garage at that point. Now it's a garage. Because the foundation kept it down. Now, where they're building the new foundation now, he just had the regular carport. We took his carport off the neighbor's house because that's where they landed. And then eventually ended up in the town because the foundation wasn't there. And so much of our life, what you're building, we all build our lives on something, intentional or not. And what matters is, overtly build it on bad things, or are you going to focus on the words of Jesus? And that's the way we live our life. And so we need to build things on his teaching, his ways, because that's going to be the unshakable ground. Coming back to verse 28, it says, since we are receiving a kingdom that is unshakable, let us be thankful and please God by worshiping him with holy fear and awe, for our God is a devouring fire. Worshiping him. God deserves our worship. That's kind of the first thing we did today is, we do worship. Now, there's a story I've told before, and there's a random churchgoer kind of says something. He says, I didn't really like worship today. And Francis Chan says, that's okay, we weren't worshiping you. Now, I love the fact that you guys practice. I love the fact that you have musically talented people, not Jeff up there. I had to lead worship one time. Man, I've never seen guests leave so fast. It was in California. Pastor left. I was on vacation. People got sick. I had to lead worship. I literally couldn't step towards them. They were out the door. And I was like, I don't blame them. I get it. If I'd been to this church, Anyway, we want excellence in music, but it's not about just, did I feel it? Worship is this response to God because of how awesome he is. The root word is sort of this idea of, to lay down before. So there's this recognition that there's a God and I'm not him. And he's great. Now, it's funny. My daughter made fun of me a little bit because some of you know I was at a powerlifting meet with her, and she was competing, I wasn't. I'm sitting there, and the announcer, and if you've seen any of the pictures online, the guy in the purple suit announced, hey, Mike Hall's here. And my eyes lit up. Mike Hall's here? Because, he was my hero when I was a kid. I did current events articles on him, like in the 9th grade. Like, he was just massively strong at a time in my life where I was trying to get massively strong. And it was like, I'd met him several times. I was like so intimidated. I was like, I remember the first time I met him, it was almost like worship. I cowered down before him, It was like, oh, the mighty Mike Hall. I met him at the Sheraton, because he was at this banquet, and it was before the Sheraton was owned by Dell State and everything. But I just remember, and then I met him when I was like 16. I was at a bench meeting. He was there with people. I couldn't even bring myself to go up and say hi to him. I just kind of like, Mr. Hall, Mr. Hall. I'm older now. I just walked up to, hey, Mike. Big fan of yours, been a fan my whole life, did a current event article on you. My daughter was still kind of making fun of me because I was gushing a little bit. But, it's not the same reaction because now he's just a dude. He's an awesome dude. Love the dude. He's a good guy, believer, follower of Jesus, But now he's my brother, not my God, you know what I mean? And that's different. When you're in awe of God, you worship is just this response of saying, you're worthy of my worship. Even if I had a bad week, you're worthy. Even if I didn't like the song, and I did like the songs today, you're worthy of my worship. And it's not about just, did we like the music? Did we like the voices? It's our response to God. Because I've been to places that have incredible music, incredible voices. I don't think they're worshiping. Anyway, anyway. I'm not talking about anybody Anyway. but it's, we fall down in holy fear and awe. We love God, but this healthy fear, and that fear not like running from something because you're scared. We've talked about this. I always think of fear like a Rottweiler because, I love Rottweilers. Anyone like Rottweilers? Anyone fear Rottweilers? Because you should, because it's an awesome dog and they have big heads, and there's something about big-headed dogs that I like. I just look, and I deliver food to this one place, and there's this giant pit bull, and he comes out and runs to the car every time, and I love it when he runs to the car. Well, it might be a she, I'm not sure, but I think it is a she. Anyway, dog runs up the car every time I'm there. I love this dog, but I always kind of get out a little unsure, right? Because that dog could tear me apart. This one's a big one. I mean, this one looks like he lifts weights. I mean, I was like asking him the other day, I'm like, how do you get those things? It's a powerful, awesome dog. So there's respect. And that's how God is awesome and powerful. He's good. So we're in his presence. We can be confident, but there's a level of awe and respect. And that's part of what worship is. And it says, for our God is a devouring fire. Most of you know, if you've been around here long enough, you'll hear a story about me chainsawing something, right? Like I chainsaw occasionally. I work jobs sometimes where I have to, use a chainsaw. So I've been using a chainsaw a long time. I've cut fingers off with my chainsaw. Don't worry, it grew back. Well, no, it didn't grow back, but I sewed it back. Anyway, I heat with wood though, and so I have to do a lot of chainsawing of trees. And we worked the tornado back in. After the tornado, and we'd lost about 40 trees. I still got piles of trees I'm cutting up. 2-3 years later, whatever this is, I'm still cutting trees, and I'm also being attacked by bees when I do it, which is awesome. But here's the thing. There's a lot of work to heating with wood. But the financial reward is I don't have to pay for heat in the winter. But when you have a wood stove, though, here's the thing. You have to learn a lot about fire. Now, most of us think we kind of get fire, right? Like it flames, you light it, it's good. But I remember in Maine, we had our first wood stove because we moved, again, from Pittsburgh, LA, Maine. We were just going everywhere. And so we were living up in Maine, and I got my first wood stove, and it was, and there's your wood stove aficionado, like I know Dana is. It was the furthest thing from her. It was purple though. No, I'm kidding. It was, Dana likes purple if you know Dana. But it was a Vermont Castings Defiant. It was like the largest wood stove they ever made. I could put like a 24-inch log in this thing. It was a huge stove. And I got it, and it was like, I forget, it was like 500 or 600 pounds. I mean, getting this thing into the house was ridiculous. And the people who I got it from was a friend of mine. I used to hunt with him and everything. And it was like too big for his house. He got it thinking it would be a good idea, and he's just like, I just can't stand the heat. It's like 100 degrees in my house all the time because he had this little house. And so I get it. And, it was a process learning how to use that wood stove, right? Because it wasn't just like lighting a fire. There's all these like dampers and different things you have to do. Now here's the thing. If you do it wrong, you don't have any heat. If you do it wrong the other way, and I did this one time, I walked down, the whole stove was orange. That's not a good thing either, because I was about to burn down my house, right? I had to learn. This is like before the internet was as big, so like trying to figure out how to use all these dampers and things, complicated. But you have to learn how to control the fire. And then in Delaware, when I moved down here, and we didn't have it for a while, and then we got a wood stove, I had to teach my kids what they can't touch, right? Because kids don't know. Wood stove, it's warm, it's nice, it's pretty. Because, there's something about a fire, right? Like, you ever go camping, just stare at the fire? You're like, it's like old TV or something. Like, I could sit there and stare at a fire forever, and say nothing. And that's good, because that's the only time I'm silent, right? And it's just like, fire, mesmerizing. And so you got to watch kids don't, walk right into it. Especially with a wood stove, because it doesn't feel that hot till you touch it. And when people come over to the house and we have the wood stove burning, we have to kind of tell them things like, don't stand too close to the fire. I know it feels good, but guess what? Your clothes are about to burst into flames. Not good for you. But anyway, so there's all these rules because fire burns. And so this image of God comes out of Deuteronomy is, God is this devouring fire. And you have to teach your kids the rules because ultimately, if you're not careful, bad things happen. And God is powerful and consuming. Ultimately, here's the thing. Judgment will come without a warning. I was working this morning, and all of a sudden, everything went dark. I was like, it's funny because I think I'd just written this line in my notes because I was like, I got to say something there. Like, judgment will come without a warning. Everything went. I was like, is this it? And it wasn't. It was just the electric went out. I don't know why it went out. That's probably my dad didn't get up. His alarm clock never went off. I guess I should have called him. Anyway, lights go out. I was kind of prepping. I was kind of tweaking things. I couldn't do the YouVersion event, although we did it later because I figured out a way to, I tethered with my phone because the internet comes through your electric and everything, or needs it to run. I couldn't make my coffee, so it's still sitting over there. And if it's still sitting there next week, I forgot it. Anyway, kind of had to move to Plan B, right? And you can learn to live without electric. I did it for weeks after the tornado. See, I had another story. I had a Plan B, but in life there really is no Plan B. It's just Plan Jesus, Plan J. I don't know. Ultimately, if you're already building on a strong foundation, awesome. But if you're not, we call it the ABCs of salvation. Admit that, admit that you're a sinner and have made mistakes. And I think that's hard for a lot of us in America because we want to think we're perfect. Even, we always say, we're all a little jacked up because, it's hard for people. Some people don't like that. Some people don't know what I mean by that. They think I'm jacking up a car. I don't know. But it means, we're all messed up. And if you don't think you're messed up, you're probably really messed up because we all have problems. We all sin. We all struggle. And then believe that Jesus is God's only son. He chose to die for you on a cross. And it's a simple message, but it's life-changing. I heard that message years ago. It's changed the way I live my life. And then C is commit yourself to following a life, following Jesus and serving others. It's this life-changing thing. That's the foundation to build your life on. And then you begin to grow and build your life on these words Jesus says. You read the Sermon on the Mount, you read the Gospels, you read the epistles and the letters and things, and find out the way we live is different because we have an awesome God. It's the way He's designed us to live. It's the best way of living. And if you're committed to follow, sometimes, I gave you the book title. I don't think I read any of the book to you, but Eugene Peterson, this guy who translated the Message translation, which is a fun modern translation in the Bible, he said he wrote a book on discipleship, and I started reading it. It was Along Obedience in the Same Direction, Discipleship in an Instant Society. I love that long obedience in the same direction because life is long. Like, I've been following Jesus since I was 20. Some guy was trying to convert me to his religion the other day, and he's like asking me all these questions, and it was like online, and I'm like, he's like, so how long you been a believer? I'm like, 30 years, and that's crazy to say now, because that was like this kind of stuff your parents say happened like 30 years ago. Tell you, it's weird when you go to like your reunion, it's like the 25th or 30th reunion, you're like, that's the stuff parents and old people do, and I'm there now. But I've been following him a long time, and I think there's some truth that the thing I like about the title is, it's a long obedience in the same direction. Life is long, and we have to be obedient through life, and it takes a long time, and we can wander a bit because life is so long. And so there's always this self-correction going, do I need to tweak my path? Is there stuff that creeps in? Are there, I'm mostly on the ground, but I'm starting to stick my foot over here in the lake because we're getting off. And so, I always ask, have I gotten on the wrong path? How do I need to adjust my life? And here's the thing. I think sometimes these passages that I think are about judgment are kind of sort of tough to we like the baby 6-pound Jesus kind of thing. We like the cute and cuddly. We like the Jesus teaching, but ultimately there is this judgment to life, and I think for some of us that's scary. But it's also it brings a time where justice will finally reign. It brings a time where there will be no more tears and no more pain. It brings hope to a new life and eternal future through those who trust in God, and ultimately, what we do in this life matters and echoes in the next.